Grandmother left behind a house that nobody wanted until she was gone. That is not an exaggeration. For the 11 years she lived in that farmhouse outside of Claremont, my family treated it as a burden. The drive was too long. The upkeep was too much. The smell of the well water made my sister uncomfortable. But the moment the hospice nurse called my mother at 6:42 on a Wednesday morning, everything changed. I know the exact time because I was sitting next to my mother when her phone rang. I watched her face do the thing it does when something costs her more than she expected. We were at the hospital, 2 floors below where my father was recovering from his second stroke in 14 months. That was 3 years ago. This is the part that comes after. My name is Lorelei. I'm 29. I work in title insurance, which is a job that most people don't think about until something goes wrong. What I do, specifically, is trace the legal history of properties. I find the gaps. I find the liens that were filed and never discharged. I find the heirs who were left out of wills either accidentally or on purpose. I find the signatures that don't match. I spend my days inside the paper architecture of other people's lives, which means I understand exactly how easily a property can change hands. I also understand exactly how to prevent it. My father's name is Duncan. He's 61. The first stroke left him with a tremor in his left hand and a fatigue that he describes as being perpetually jet-lagged without the trip. The second one was quieter in some ways and louder in others. He can walk. He can talk. He sometimes loses a word in the middle of a sentence, reaches for it, and you can see him waiting in the space where it used to be. My mother, Ruth, became his calendar, his medication log. The person who drives to the pharmacy at 7 a.m. because they changed the pickup window again, and she doesn't want him to worry about it. She doesn't complain. She never has. What she does is compress. She makes herself smaller and quieter and more efficient so that everything that needs to happen happens. I have watched her do this for 3 years, and it is the bravest and saddest thing I have ever seen in person. When Grandma Cecile died and left the farmhouse to my mother and my Aunt Lorraine jointly, I was the one who spent 2 weekends going through the deed records and the estate paperwork. I was the one who found that Lorraine had already filed a motion to partition the property, meaning she wanted it sold and split, before the funeral had even taken place. My mother didn't know. She found out when a letter arrived addressed to her in legal language she didn't recognize. She called me and read it to me over the phone, and I could hear her trying to make her voice sound steady, which meant she was standing in the kitchen so my father wouldn't see her face. We handled it. The partition motion was withdrawn after my mother agreed to buy out Lorraine's share over 18 months. It cost them money they didn't really have in the shape they needed it. But the farmhouse stayed. That was the part that mattered. The farmhouse stayed. That was the part that mattered. The property sits on 11 acres in a county where land prices have been creeping upward for 6 years. There's a creek that runs along the back edge of the property, and in spring, the pasture fills in with wild clover that my father used to walk through in the mornings before the strokes. The house itself needed work, a lot of work. The roof had been patched too many times. The heating system was original to the 1970s. The bathroom off the master bedroom had a step-down entrance that my father's neurologist had flagged as a fall risk. I started planning the renovation 8 months after Grandma Cecile died. I didn't tell my sister. My sister's name is Sylvie. She's 4 years older than me. Sylvie is not malicious in the way that announces itself. She is generous in the way that shows up only when there's an audience and absent in the way that leaves no fingerprints. When my father had his first stroke, she flew in for a week. She cried at the hospital in a way that was genuine, I think, but she also posted about it, which made it complicated. She organized a meal train for my parents and then handed it off to a neighbor to manage after 3 days because she had a work thing. She texted the family group chat regular updates on my dad's condition as though she were the correspondent, even though I was the one driving him to every follow-up appointment. I don't say this with bitterness. I say it because it is the record. Her husband's name is Grant. Grant is the kind of man who has an opinion about everything and skin in none of it. He has strong views on property investment, on tax strategy, on the correct way to manage inherited assets, all delivered with the casual authority of someone who has read 3 articles on a subject and now considers himself fluent. He works in sales. He is very good at it. He understands that the gap between what something is worth and what someone believes it is worth is where money lives, and he has built his entire personality around standing in that gap. I renovated the farmhouse over 14 months. I hired a contractor I had worked with through a professional contact, someone I trusted because I had seen his work on a title transfer gone sideways where his documentation was the cleanest thing in the file. I pulled the permits. I managed the draws. I drove out to Claremont on weekends and made decisions about window headers and subfloor material with the same attention I give to title commitments at work. The bathroom got rebuilt from the ground up. No step down, zero threshold shower, grab bars installed inside the wall framing so they were weight-bearing and permanent rather than surface-mounted and decorative. The heating system was replaced entirely. The roof was stripped and redecked, not patched. I had the kitchen counter height adjusted because my father, on his bad days, is more stable when he can brace against a surface rather than reach up to one. Total cost, $218,000. My savings, a personal loan I took against my 401k for the first phase, and a small amount from a financial gift my grandmother had left specifically to me in a separate codicil that Lorraine had tried unsuccessfully to challenge. I did not put the farmhouse in my name. I did not put it in my own name. What I did was work with a property attorney, someone I knew from a closing I had managed 2 years earlier, to restructure the title into a life estate with a remainder interest. My parents are the life tenants. That means they have the absolute legal right to occupy and use the property for the duration of their lives. Neither of them can be removed, displaced, or pressured out. When they both pass, the remainder goes to a trust I established with specific terms about how the property can be used or sold. I am the trustee. I am not a beneficiary. That distinction matters. I am not holding this for myself. I am holding it for them. I had the life estate deed recorded with the county 9 months before the renovation finished. My parents found out about the farmhouse the way I wanted them to. On a Saturday in late September, I told my mother I needed her help with something at the property. A small thing, I said. Something with the permit sign-off. I picked them up at 9 in the morning. My father brought his coffee in a travel mug, which he does whenever he thinks he's going somewhere that isn't worth getting dressed up for. It took the whole drive for me to start feeling like I might actually cry, which is not something I do easily. When we turned onto the property road and my father saw the roof, new, clean, dark shingles against the October sky, he put his hand flat against the window glass. He didn't say anything. My mother leaned forward and her breath came out in a long, slow way that sounded less like surprise and more like relief. The way your body sounds when something it has been bracing against is finally gone. I parked and we walked in. Every room. I walked them through every room. My mother opened and closed the kitchen cabinets 4 times before she stopped pretending she wasn't crying. My father stood in the doorway of the new bathroom and ran his fingers along the grab bar inside the shower, pressed his palm against it, testing the weight. It didn't move. He looked at me and said, "You built this for me specifically, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. He nodded, and we stood there in the bathroom of the house his mother-in-law had left, which had been falling apart for 11 years, and he put his hand on my shoulder and kept it there for a moment longer than he needed to. That was the gift. My sister found out 10 days later. I knew she would. My mother cannot hold happiness inside without it eventually spilling. She called Sylvie during a Tuesday afternoon the way she calls people when something is so good she can't help it. When she is so full of a feeling that she needs to tell someone or she might float away. She told her about the new roof and the bathroom and the kitchen and the permits and the $218,000 renovation that her younger daughter had financed and managed entirely by herself. I know this because my mother called me afterward with a voice that was very carefully calm. "Sylvie wants to bring the boys out this weekend just to see it. Is that okay?" I said, "It's your home, Mom. That's your decision." She said, "I know. I just wanted to tell you first," which was her way of saying she already felt something shifting. I should have driven out that Saturday. I had a file review that I had been pushing for 2 weeks that I couldn't reschedule, and I told myself it was a visit. Just a visit. Sylvie wasn't Grant. The legal structure was solid. I had done the work. I was not wrong about the structure. I was wrong about the timeline. My mother's text came on a Monday evening. It was 1 sentence. "Can you call me when you have a minute? Nothing urgent." Which is her way of saying it is, in fact, urgent, but she doesn't want me to panic before she can explain. I called her immediately. My father answered instead. He said, "Grant has been talking to a real estate attorney. He says the life estate can be contested. He says we should talk about it as a family before anything becomes permanent." A pause. "I think he brought paperwork." I said, "Dad, the life estate was recorded 9 months ago. It is permanent." He said, "I know." Another pause. "I don't understand what is happening. I said, I'll be there Saturday morning. I drove out Friday night. Grant's truck was not in the driveway Friday night. It was there Saturday at 9:15, which was earlier than I had expected. So was Sylvie's car. I parked behind them and sat for a moment and thought about the file I had brought with me, which was sitting in the back seat in the same accordion folder I use for complex title closings. Tabbed, indexed, every document in order. I went inside. My mother was at the kitchen stove making coffee she didn't need, which is what she does when she is managing anxiety by staying in motion. My father was at the kitchen table with his travel mug and a look on his face that I recognized, controlled, deliberate, working to appear unbothered. In front of him was a folder I didn't recognize. Grant was standing in the living room with his phone, taking photographs of the renovated fireplace wall. He did not hear me come in. Sylvie came in from the back hallway. She smiled the way she does when she has already rehearsed the conversation. Lo, good, you made it. We figured you'd be here early. I set my bag down. What's in the folder? She glanced at my father's table and then back at me. Her expression did the thing it does. Warm, slightly preemptive, already framing a version of events where what she's about to say is reasonable. Grant had someone look at the property structure, just to understand our options. Our options, I said. As a family. She said it like the word was a door she expected me to walk through. He thinks the life estate limits flexibility, that it might actually hurt mom and dad long term if they ever need to leverage the asset, like for care costs. Grant came in from the living room. He was wearing the expression he wears when he's entering a room where he intends to be the authority. He put his phone in his pocket and pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited to. Good news is, this is fixable, he said. The structure your sister set up, it's not bad, but it has blind spots. A family LLC would give you more flexibility, more protection, more. Who told you the life estate could be contested? I said. He looked at me. I talked to someone, a real estate attorney. What was the basis of the challenge? There are grounds. He said it the way people say things when they don't have a specific answer but don't want that to show. I sat down across from him and opened my accordion folder. The first document was the recorded deed, certified copy, county recorder's stamp, filing date, instrument number. I placed it on the table and turned it to face him. The life estate deed was recorded 9 months ago. The recording is public record. The life tenants are my parents. The remainder passes to a trust at the conclusion of both their lives. That trust document is also recorded. Grant looked at the document. Recording doesn't make something uncontestable. You're right, I said. Which is why I also have this. I placed the second document. This is a written opinion from a property attorney who specializes in life estate instruments in this state. She reviewed the deed language, the trust terms, and the county recording, and provided a written opinion that the structure is valid, correctly executed, and not subject to challenge by non-tenants or remainder beneficiaries. I paused. Non-tenants means you. Remainder beneficiaries means the trust, which has no living human beneficiary withstanding to bring a challenge. Sylvie's chin had come up slightly. You're the trustee. I am. So you control what happens to it when they're gone. I protect it according to the trust terms. What happens when they're gone is already written and recorded. It doesn't pass through me, it passes through the instrument. My father had stopped looking at his coffee mug. He was watching me. Grant leaned back in his chair. This feels like you're trying to lock everyone out. There is no everyone, I said. There are the life tenants, who are my parents, and there is the remainder trust, which has no discretionary authority. There's nothing to lock anyone out of because there was never anything available to unlock. I placed the third document. This is the trust instrument. You're welcome to read it. The terms are specific. The property cannot be sold, leased for commercial purposes, or encumbered during my parents' lifetimes without a court order, which would require my parents to petition, which they have no reason to do. The property cannot be transferred into any other ownership structure, including a family LLC, without dissolving the life estate, which would require my parents' consent and a new deed, which I would not prepare. Grant stared at the paper. He was recalibrating. I could see it. So you've made yourself the gatekeeper. I've made the instrument the gatekeeper. I don't have discretion here. The document does. This is insane, he said. His warmth had gone thin, the way it does when the performance stops working. We're family. You did all of this without telling anyone. I told the people whose names are in the deed. Sylvie is your sister. I looked at him for a moment. Then I looked at my sister. She was standing very still. I did not tell Sylvie, I said, because the last time this family had property in a room with Grant, a partition motion was filed before the funeral was finished. I picked up the folder. I built this for my parents. I renovated it for my parents. I structured it legally for my parents. Sylvie's name is not in the deed because Sylvie did not finance the renovation, manage the permits, or drive to Claremont on 14 consecutive weekends in the rain to make decisions about subfloor material. I did. The kitchen was quiet. I need you both to leave, I said. You can come back when you've been invited. By them. Grant stood up. He made phone calls in the driveway, loud enough to carry through the window I had cracked above the kitchen sink. Words like overreach, unilateral, family dispute attorney. Sylvie spent a long time in the bathroom off the hallway. When they finally left, their boys, 9 and 11, completely confused, had been sitting on the porch steps throwing acorns at each other for 20 minutes. My mother made coffee we all needed this time. We sat at the kitchen table after their cars turned out of the property road, and my father said he came out the first weekend they visited. He walked every room. He asked about the acreage. He asked about the well permit. He wrapped his hands around his mug. I thought he was interested, the way people are interested in things that aren't theirs. My mother said, he asked me about long-term care costs, whether we had thought about what happens if your father needs a facility. I said, he was establishing a rationale. She nodded. She already knew that. What followed was not over when they left. 6 days later, my mother called me at work. Her voice had the specific quality it gets when she is frightened, but does not want to transmit the fear before she has the facts. Someone had called the county assessor's office asking about the property's assessed value and whether it had been recently surveyed. The assessor's office had flagged the call as potentially connected to the recorded deed and called my parents to verify that no changes to the property status were being sought. They weren't. But someone had been asking. I called the assessor's office myself. I filed a notation on the property record requesting that any inquiry related to ownership, survey, or title be flagged and a callback placed to my contact number before any information was provided. It wasn't legally binding on the office, but it put a paper trail on the inquiry and made the next one harder to make anonymously. Then I called the property attorney who had provided the original opinion. I asked her to prepare a letter on firm letterhead, addressed to Grant and Sylvie by name, noting that the life estate was valid and recorded, that no legal basis for a challenge had been identified, and that any future inquiry, filing, or action purporting to affect the property's title without court authorization would constitute interference with a recorded instrument and would be addressed accordingly. The letter named the property, the instrument number, and the date of recording. It was sent certified mail. Both signatures were confirmed. 3 weeks after that, a man called my parents' number asking about the property. He said he represented an interested buyer. He said he understood the property might be coming available. My father said he wasn't interested and ended the call. He texted me immediately after. Someone called about buying the farmhouse. Said it might be coming available. I don't know who he was. I pulled a call log from my parents' phone account, which they had added me to after the first stroke so I could manage it if needed. The incoming number traced to a real estate brokerage in a town 40 minutes from Claremont. I called the brokerage and spoke to the managing broker. I explained that the property in question was held in a life estate with recorded remainder trust, that it was not available for sale, that my parents had no authority to sell it independently of the trust structure, and that any future contact with the life tenants representing the property as available would be considered misrepresentation of its legal status and would be reported to the state real estate licensing board. The broker was apologetic in the way that suggested he hadn't known the full picture when someone called him about the listing. I sent a follow-up email with the instrument number and the county recorder's link so he had it in writing. Then I drove out to Claremont on a Thursday evening. No emergency, no task, just a bag of groceries and a thermos of coffee. And I sat at my parents' kitchen table and told them what had happened in a way that was factual and calm and didn't minimize it. My mother listened with her hands flat on the table. My father listened with his eyes on the window. When I finished, my father said, "Can they actually do anything to it?" I said, "No. The structure is solid. They can ask questions. They can make calls. They cannot change the deed without a court order, and a court would require a legitimate legal basis that doesn't exist here," he said. "Okay. And then I keep thinking about the fact that you drove out here 14 weekends in a row and I didn't know." I said, "You would have told me it was too much." He said, "It is too much." I said, "I know." I did it anyway. He looked at me. His left hand, the one with the trimmer, was resting on the table between us. He moved it toward me slightly. I put my hand over it. We sat like that for a while. My sister has called me twice since then. The first call I let go to voicemail. She said she wanted to explain Grant's thinking, that he genuinely believed he was trying to help, that she hoped I understood that. I listened to the message 3 times. I believed the part about her hoping. I was less certain about the rest. The second call I answered. She said, "I didn't know he was going to do any of that. The brokerage call, the assessor's office. I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't make the calls yourself." She was quiet for a moment. "That's not the same as saying you believe me." "No," I said, "it's not." We didn't stay on the phone long after that. There was nothing cruel in how it ended. There was just not enough in common between what she was asking me to give and what I had available to give right now. The door is not locked, but I am not standing in front of it waiting. 2 months after the driveway incident, I drove out on a Sunday afternoon in November. My father was on the back porch watching the creek. The water was low, the way it gets in late fall when the rain has been scarce, and the light was coming through the bare trees at an angle that made everything look like a photograph someone had decided not to take. He heard me come through the door and turned. "The clover's gone," he said, "but it'll come back." I sat down beside him. The cold came to the porch planks in a slow way, the kind that you only notice once you've been sitting for a while. My mother came out with a blanket and dropped it across both of us without saying anything and went back inside. My father said, "When I came home from the hospital the second time, I sat in our kitchen for about 3 days and thought about all the things I would never do again. The list got pretty long." He was quiet. Then I stopped making the list. I said, "What made you stop?" He said, "I realized I was counting what was over instead of looking at what was left." He looked at the creek. "There's still a lot left." We sat there until the light changed. What I understand now, sitting on that porch in November, is something that took me a while to put into words. I spent a lot of years being the one who handled things quietly, not because no one else could, but because when things fell through, when the partition motion arrived without warning, when the medication change wasn't caught until my father's hands stopped working the way they used to, when the call came at 6:42 in the morning, I was the one who was already paying attention. I did not choose that role. It chose me the way things choose you when you were the one standing closest. What I built was not a statement. I did not renovate that farmhouse to prove anything to my sister or to Grant or to anyone else. I did it because I could see a version of my parents' life in which they had somewhere solid to land, somewhere that was theirs without condition, somewhere that didn't require them to ask for it or manage it or worry about it. And I wanted to make that real before something else made it impossible. I wanted to give them the quiet before I had to defend it. I know now that I can do both. I can love my family completely and still say, "This does not belong to you." I can want to preserve what my sister and I were before her husband decided to measure our parents' home by its rental yield, and still hand her husband a legal opinion letter and a certified mail signature confirmation. I can grieve the version of my family where none of this was necessary and still make sure the farmhouse deed is clean and the recorder's notation is on file and my parents know exactly what is theirs. A life estate is not a wall. It is a structure. It keeps the roof on. It keeps the rain out. It keeps the people inside it from having to worry about whether someone is going to call a broker and tell him their home might be coming available. My father told me something on that porch in November that I haven't stopped thinking about. He said, "I spent so long being careful not to be a burden that I forgot I was allowed to have things that were just mine, just good, just for no other reason than because I deserved them." He picked up his coffee mug. "You made something I didn't think I was allowed to ask for." I said, "You didn't have to ask." He smiled. "Not the managed one, the one from before. If you have ever done something quietly, without credit, for someone who needed it, and then had to stand between that thing and the people who wanted to take it, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Protecting what you built is not the same as closing a door. Sometimes it's the only way to make sure the door stays open for the people who are supposed to walk through it. There's something nobody tells you about doing the right thing quietly. It doesn't protect you from the people who are watching. I spent 14 months driving to Claremont on weekends. I pulled permits. I argued with a subcontractor about window flashing at 8 in the morning in February. I sat in a title attorney's office and read trust language for 2 hours until I was certain Not reasonably certain, but certain that what I was building could not be taken. And then I drove home and went to work on Monday and didn't tell anyone. Not because I wanted credit for the silence, because I knew that the moment certain people found out, the thing I was building would stop being a gift and start being a negotiation. What Grant did was not complicated. It was just old. It is the oldest move there is. Arrive after the work is done. Rename it a shared resource and wait for the person who built it to be too tired or too conflict-averse to push back. He counted on me not having the paperwork. He counted on my parents not understanding what the paperwork meant. He counted on the fact that most people, when confronted in their own kitchen by someone who speaks with authority, will hesitate just long enough for the ground to shift. He did not count on the fact that I read deeds for a living. What I want to say about that moment at the kitchen table. When I opened the folder and placed the first document down and watched his expression change, is that it did not feel like winning. It felt like something much quieter. It felt like the farmhouse finally meaning what I had intended it to mean. A place where my father could sit on the back porch and watch the creek without anyone telling him what the land was worth per acre. That is what I built. Not leverage. Not a legal weapon. A place. The thing about cause and effect, and I have thought about this a lot since then, is that it is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. Grant made a series of choices. He measured the property. He called a broker. He sat down in my parents' kitchen like it was already his to sit in. Each of those choices had a consequence. Not because the universe was keeping score, but because actions have weight and weight accumulates. He built a structure of assumptions, and those assumptions collapsed the moment they met a recorded instrument and a person who understood what that instrument meant. My father spent 3 years trying not to be a burden. He compressed himself into the smallest possible version of his needs because he believed that was what love required. What I learned from watching him do that, and from watching my mother quietly, completely, without complaint, fold her own life around his, is that love without structure is just intention. Intention does not keep the heat on. It does not replace a roof that has been patched too many times. It does not stop a broker from calling a farmhouse coming available. Structure does. Preparation does. The willingness to sit in a lawyer's office for 2 hours and read until you are certain, that does. I am not a person who believes that doing good things guarantees good outcomes. I am a person who believes that knowing your paperwork significantly improves the odds. I am a person who believes that care, applied consistently and without announcement, builds something real. And I am a person who has learned the slow way, through 14 weekend drives and one very quiet folder, that protecting what you built is not the opposite of generosity. It is the completion of it. My father told me something on that porch in November that I have carried with me every day since. He said he had spent so long being careful not to ask for too much that he forgot he was allowed to have things that were just good. Just his, just for no other reason than because he had earned them by being the kind of person who deserved them. He did not ask me to build him anything. He would never have asked. That is exactly why I did it. If you have ever been the one who handles things quietly, who shows up before anyone calls, who reads the fine print because someone has to, who builds something solid for the people who would never ask you to, this is for you. What you do matters, even when no one is watching, especially then.